Hello, everybody. Welcome to World Backup Day. For those of you that didn't know, today is World Backup Day, and we have a really exciting presentation today. I'm going to talk all about the lessons that people are learning from big game ransomware attacks, how to prevent them, and how to ensure that you don't fall victim to some of these issues. And if you do, what you can do to get out of trouble. All right. So with that said, if you've ever seen this message, you know what's about to happen, right? Ultimately, you are already in a bad place, and in a lot of circumstances, you may feel like your only option is to follow the steps, pay the ransom, go ahead and spend whatever is necessary to get your access to your data back. The problem, though, is that ultimately, in a lot of these organizations, you may not have the money that they're asking for, or you might find yourself just reinfected again tomorrow because you're not able to quickly fix whatever went wrong that allowed them to have access to the system in the first place. And so, obviously, PNAP stance, the FBI stance, Veeam stance is that you shouldn't pay these ransoms, right? And we're going to talk a little bit about, some of the kind of key points of what is what people have suffered from, but also we're going to talk about what you can do to help prevent this and recover if it happens to your organization. So if you look at something like the Colonial pipeline attack, right? In this specific instance, I don't think it really ever came to light what was accomplished to restore services, but they took an entire critical infrastructure company down for 5 days, right? And I'm certain that money was exchanged just solely because if they had access to do the restorations that they needed to do, they would have been at backup and rolling a lot quicker. And that can happen for quite a few reasons. We're going to talk through why things like just a backup might not be good enough. But ultimately, I think this is a good example of like it can happen to anyone, and I'm not naive enough to think that these big companies are all spending everything they need to spend on their information security. But a lot of times, the attack surface has become so complex in large organizations that even if you're spending a lot of money and you have all the tools and all the SOC personnel and everybody in place, it's still very difficult to defend yourself against essentially the world, right? And in high profile infrastructure specifically, companies, your adversary is to some extent, the size of countries. And so, you're in a position where you might have a team of 25, 30 people, and that sounds like enough, right? And you might have millions of dollars of tooling, and that sounds like enough. But ultimately, when you're faced against an adversary that is orders of magnitude larger than you, you may find that your solutions are lacking. And so if you look at the Colonial pipeline attack, we have this like multi-month period where the hackers were present in the system, took data out of the system silently, right? And then shut down operations. So they already had the data that they came to get, or at least a haphazard collection of data, hoping that something was good. And then everything, from that point, they've got everything that they need. The only thing left to do is to extort you for more money, right? So they took out their critical infrastructure systems, shut down pipeline operations. You have, all of the effort of the government, of the entire United States government, was there to help them recover, and it still took them 5 days, right? You know, in this specific example, they definitely paid money. They also were able to recover from their own backups, but the data, the actual happenings will come out eventually. But it's a little murky what was happening over that 4 or 5 day period to restoration. And so I think that ultimately they come to market months later and say, oh yeah, by the way, on top of us getting shut down and hit with ransomware, we also lost a ton of our company data, which probably included at least many secret things about their pipeline operations. And a lot of companies do that because they're told that it exists on the dark net anyway, so might as well get out in front of it. And then you got companies that maybe aren't thinking about protecting themselves as much. Pipeline operations for that covers the entire eastern seaboard of the United States. I find that at least most organizations that we work with that are similar in stature are spending a lot of money on security. If you're the world's largest meat producer, maybe not, right? Maybe it doesn't really cross your mind every day that I need to spend millions and millions of dollars protecting our infrastructure. And in this case, you had Russian attackers, are evil specifically, locking down these systems, a very unprepared organization, ultimately paying ransom once again, even though they claim that they were able to restore most of their data from their backups. Usually those statements are made in a half-hearted attempt to say, hey, look, we did this for expediency, because either accessing our backups were more difficult than we expected, or maybe likely only part of them came back. And again, we'll talk through some of those reasons and why people end up in this space. But ultimately, a 4 to 5 day shutdown, once again, millions of dollars out the door, huge black eye from their partners and supply chain partners. And ultimately, if they had all of their data in a location that was quickly restorable on systems that were immutable, they would have been in a much better position to recover quickly. And so we see that 75% plus of these issues arise from some type of phishing or drive-by download issue, right? It's almost always humans that mess up, that have a level of access that is more than what they should, even if that's by accident, right? And then it's somewhat game over, right? If you're sitting in your house, browsing some sports website or whatever you're doing, and you get infected with a piece of malware, and then you go and you connect to your corporate VPN, and you have a level of access to the network that you shouldn't, that is a perfect pivot point for people to gain access to critical systems. And so usually we're in a position, or at least in the past, this is mostly just a for-profit thing, right? Where they lock up your stuff, it's all automated, there was no advanced, persistent threat. It was literally just for extortion purposes. Now we're starting to see a big change in terms of highly targeted exfiltration focus hacking events that end more similar to Colonial pipeline, that end in a ransomware state, cryptographically locked out state, and a last-ditch attempt at taking more money from the people that they've exploited already. And ultimately, even what we're talking about today in terms of backup and recovery isn't good enough, right? Because data exfiltration in these scenarios is the target. And while your business may be back up and rolling, even in a highly prepared organization, your business may be back up and rolling in minutes or days, right, or hours. If you have the right capabilities in place, you may still find yourself in a position where your data's been stolen, and potentially your business might be in jeopardy because of the data that was stolen. So I think that's what the major takeaway from the talk today is we're not seeing this huge sign of slowing down, but we're not seeing the explosive growth that we saw during the beginning of COVID. Really and truly, from 2019, into 2019 to 2020, late 2021, it was 105%, right? So like doubling, in that 1 year period. But we're not seeing that as much anymore. What we are seeing is extremely sophisticated attacks. I think that we've talked about this in the past. If you've been on one of our webinars, this idea of ransomware as a service continues to be a major problem. It doesn't take an expert anymore. It literally takes somebody with cash, a little cash, to pay a criminal to infect a target for them, and then usually a split of whatever is extorted or taken from that company. I think that this idea of threatening to publish your data on the dark web is almost a default move now, because they know that a lot of people are starting to get, they're starting to understand better ways to protect themselves, backups, mutability of their backups, things like this. So it has expanded quite a bit into not just we're going to delete all your stuff or we're going to lock it up forever, but even if you don't pay us and you work around it yourself over a few hours, we're going to publish your data on the dark web, and then we're going to ruin your company's name. So we are entering times where it's not as clear cut as I have a backup, it's immutable, and I recover and everything's okay. But it's certainly better than not having any of that business continuity capability in place. This contactless delivery thing, Log4j definitely really opened the door for that. I think anytime you see ubiquitous remote exploits, you end up in a position where this kind of like scan-oriented infection, kind of worm-like ransomware becomes a wave of ransomware attacks. But I don't expect that to be the case. I think still majority over time it's going to be happen from users doing the wrong thing with their computer. So what can you do, right? You can really look at enhancing your backup capabilities, not only the frequency or your recovery point objective, but also ensuring that you are taking that data, you're putting it off site somewhere that can be easily recovered from. You're constantly staying on top of the things that are going into your preparation process. I think that's another place that a lot of people mess up, is they put themselves in a position where they took a backup, they made a backup job. Veeam users on the call, you make a backup job, you copy that job somewhere else, you pat yourself on the back and you walk away, right? You have to test it. You have to stay in touch with the business to make sure that you're backing up what's critical to them now, right? And I think that making this technical recovery plan, I think that's the best verbiage to use. This technical recovery plan makes a lot of sense as part of an incident response and business continuity plan. Making sure you know exactly what you need to do in the event of a disaster to recover your infrastructure is critical to your company. And working with your business, if you're technical people on the call, working with your business to ensure you understand what's critical to them is paramount. And I think, and Michael's going to talk a little bit about how Veeam does this specifically, but leveraging immutability of a backup repository or object lock in an S3 bucket is going to save you so much headache, because this is not a new idea. This happened, earlier in the progression of ransomware. But if you're not taking steps to secure your backups, the ransomware is going to encrypt them too, right? And then you're in a really bad place. And then I would say even just using things like insider protection as an extra bit. It's not really ransomware specific, but malicious deletion of data happens every day in the technical fields and technical companies that are dominated by highly technical people. People get mad, they do bad things, potentially criminal things, and you end up in a position where it's a self-inflicted wound. And with things like insider protection, you can ensure that even if your data is deleted from your critical system and the backup, quote unquote, is deleted, there's still a copy of that data for a period of time. Just, the recycle bin of your business to some extent. So with that, I think I'm going to turn it over to Mike Deemer. He's going to walk through the Veeam side of this equation and how we work together to make this possible. Take it away, Mike.
Perfect. Well, I appreciate that, William. And good morning, good afternoon, good morning, everybody. Again, my name is Michael Deemer, Systems Engineer here for Veeam Software, and I'll be taking you through the Veeam side of the house and how we protect against all those nasty, malicious acts that William was talking about earlier. So here on my next slide, I really want to get to one of the main rules that most backup companies adhere to. This is 321. Now, we also have 3210 on the screen, but I want to just break this down really quickly. One of the big things I want to say is if you're not adhering to this rule, or this is the first time hearing about this rule, please notate this down. This is something that me and phoenixNAP didn't come up with. This has been an industry standard for many, many, many years. Ultimately, at the end of the day, this is how we have that advanced plan. And William kind of hinted to this a little earlier, having that advanced backup strategy, making sure that we're testing, making sure that we know what critical workloads to bring up on time. This is all very paramount to the overall schema of what we're trying to accomplish. So let's kind of break this down from the hindsight here. So what does 321 realistically mean? So the 3 means 3 different copies of your data. Now, in this particular case, these are called VBKs. VBKs in the Veeam world are active fulls. So we have 3 active fulls of that particular data. Now, that number 2, what does that actually boil down to? This is 2 different forms of media, whether we're landing on SSD, NVMe, tape, you name it, as long as they're 2 separate types of landing destinations at the end of the day. Now, as long as we pair that with the number 1 and having some type of offsite at the data center, at the cloud, or a tape library, but more importantly at phoenixNAP, this is where we can have that offsite copy of that particular data. Now, this is where we talked a little bit earlier, or William talked a little bit earlier about testing. Testing. Me and him will both say this probably 10 more times because it is so important. Having a backup is absolutely critical, but testing your backup is just as critical. So what does 0 means is 0 after we run this through backup and verification recovery. Basically, that's, heartbeat test, ping test, application test, and potentially an AV scan, depending on the AV provider. Again, this is really making sure that at the end of the day that your backups are good, they're tested, and they're offsite. Again, this is one of the things I really drill home. If you aren't adhering to this rule, I would absolutely kind of take this, notate it down, and see if you have this in your own environment. So let's actually look at what it looks like when ransomware actually hits. So this slide is going to build a little bit. So on the left-hand side, just work with me here a little bit. So we have our virtual machines. Now these virtual machines may be housing databases, applications, files, and just specific data for your particular environment. Underneath that, we have our hypervisor, whether that's VMware, Hyper-V, or Nutanix. Really doesn't matter there. And then underneath this is going to bring the full picture in. This is our storage arrays, whether that's HP, Nimble, NetApp, or Dell EMC. Now, off to the right just a little bit, we have Veeam backup and a replication. So that is our backup server. And just to kind of get you guys kind of familiar with the entire slide, we have a backup target, and then we have a tape device as well. So what happens when ransomware hits, right? This is something that's real and happens on a daily basis to a lot of different particular customers out there. So the very first thing that you're going to notice is you have those locks on those virtual machines. Well, those virtual machines are housing your databases, your applications, and your files, right? So what's the first thing that we're going to need to do? Well, we need to know when was the last time we had a good copy of the backup. And that's the very first thing that we need to notate. So once we have that, we need to figure out where that particular backup is at, know that we have a good copy. Once we figure out we have a good copy, in this particular case, we're going to be using or leveraging, I should say, the modern storage snapshot. So this is taking a snapshot every hour on the hour to basically take an incremental. Now, what do we need to do as soon as we figure out, okay, cool, we have the backup, we have a good last known point in time state? Well, the next thing is we need to test and verify the backup before we push it back into production, because the last thing you want to do is take something that's already been infected or completely still infected and hasn't been scanned or there hasn't been any remediation done and stick it back in like a DR site. And then you just freeze your DR site as well. So this is where on-demand sandbox comes into play. Basically, this is your sandbox for testing. This is going to do application tests, ping tests, heartbeat tests, potentially even an AV scan to make sure that everything is going good. Now, again, that is really the main point of this is making sure that we have a good copy. We're testing it in that on-demand sandbox and making sure that it's all good here. Now, on the next side, I do want to talk a little bit more about storage snapshots. So here on our next slide, this is where I'm going to kind of get more a little bit granular into the storage snapshot side. So most people, and I would even lump myself into that, so even when I'm backing up my home environment, I'm only doing it once a night. Is there anything wrong with that? No, because I don't have high-end storage. Now, if you do have some high-end storage, and we do have some integration into those storage snapshots, I would highly take advantage of that. So basically, what is that doing? So you normally, let's just say you're taking a normal backup from 8 p.m. and then the next night at 8 p.m. again. So it's scheduled. And let's just say ransomware hits at 1 p.m. in the afternoon, and you are leveraging modern storage snapshots. Well, all you would hypothetically have to do is roll back to the previous hour, only losing an hour worth of data, comparatively to losing the same type of scenario where it maybe hits at 1 p.m. Now you're losing, from 8 p.m. the night before all the way up to 1 p.m., right? So you would have to revert all the way back to 8 p.m. to have that type of backup. Now, just a little bit of side here is our Veeam Explorers. So what are Veeam Explorers and what do they do? So the Veeam Explorer series, at the end of the day, this is how we do restores, right? Whether that's a full-blown restore or just granular restores. And we have specific Explorers built specifically for different applications, such as Exchange or Active Directory, SQL, SharePoint, or Oracle. So depending on what's going on, we have a specific UI built out for those particular applications. So that way you can just go right back and specify exactly the point in time state, exactly where you want it to go, and it all feels very easy and very easy to execute as well, because it's all done in the Explorer series. So that's kind of what I wanted to push across there. Now, what does it look like when we need to do a restore, though? So actually here on our next slide, what I'm going to look at is actually what it looks like when we need to do an entire restore or maybe just a granular restore. Again, this is that same slide that I built off a little earlier, but we have some new components on the right-hand side. If you see, we have Veeam Cloud Connect. And when I want you to think of Cloud Connect in this particular, thinking, I want you to think of phoenixNAP. So that's phoenixNAP's data center. Then we also have a tape device, a backup target, or the backup target for all of our backups. Now, what happens when we need to do a restore? Maybe it's just a small type of restore. Maybe it's an application restore for maybe one of the files. Absolutely, we can just do a granular restore of this particular files or databases. Cool. Maybe we need to do a full-blown VM recovery. Can we do that? By all means, absolutely. We can go back to the backup target and push it back into production. We can also leverage a tape device. And one thing I should say, not just any tape device. This is an offline tape device. So that way there is there's that break in that particular device. So it's offline and it's not going to be able to be touched by that particular ransomware. And then, of course, one of my favorites is pushing back from Cloud Connect. but reaching out to phoenixNAP, pushing that data back over the wire, back down to that Veeam backup and replication server. So that way you guys can go back and restore it back into production and you off to the races. Now, what does it look like, or how do we know that we're actually protected, right? So at the end of the day, we need to know that we're actually protected. So at the other end of this is actually going to be here on our next slide, is going to be knowing that we have a good, eyes and ears to that particular site. If we could go back one, William, that would be greatly appreciated. So basically what this is doing at the end of the day is Veeam 1. So what is Veeam 1? Veeam 1 is your eyes and ears to all these different remote sites. Maybe you have one, maybe you have 10, or maybe it's just your site independently. This is where you can generate reports to find out maybe there's some virtual machines that aren't being protected. Maybe you added, or the admin added a whole bunch and they were just never added into the Veeam backup and replication server. Or you want to make sure that there's a report to look against ransomware, right? Maybe there was, you're normally doing a backup job. It takes maybe 10 gigs a night. You have some high churn rate. And all of a sudden, on a Wednesday afternoon, it all of a sudden has 200 terabytes in active full being pushed. Well, you're like, well, that looks really weird. That's not a typical backup for us. So we can look at that. We can also look at backup reports. How long is a backup job taking before it's actually succeeded and pushed to a repository? Another big report that you can look at is under and overused virtual machines. So maybe you have one virtual machine in your infrastructure absolutely getting pounded, right? It has, let's just call it 4 cores and 8 gigs of RAM, but you have another virtual machine that has a really light workday, and he all of a sudden has 16 cores and 32 gigs of RAM. So doing some resource allocation, because you have that hindsight into that environment, is absolutely critical to start to optimize that particular environment on the source side, right? There's a lot of good stuff that Veeam 1 can do, but really at the end of the day, what I want to drive home is your eyes and ears and everything else that can really go in and be very nitpicky to your particular environment. Now, here on our next slide, I want to talk a little bit what William was talking about earlier, which was Hardened Linux repository, or these immutable repositories. Now, this is something that Veeam has came out with where we can leverage Linux to be our immutable repository. At the end of the day, what is that? Well, it keeps our data safe with an immutable and malware-safe storage repository for your backups. And this really, what this is, at the end of the day, it prevents malicious encryption or deletion. And kind of going more into this, I'll kind of tell you the reasons why. So the reasons why is we're malware safe because we use that insider protection. Here on the next slide, I'll kind of show you a couple different things on how that is actually set up. So if you look here to the right, you're going to see a trial attempt to back up or to delete that data. So if you see that little gray box and then you see those little yellow asterisks, basically what that says is, can this backup be deleted? No, because it's immutable. And then it's going to be said, it's going to say fail to delete immutable storage. Why is it going to be failing to delete storage? Well, it's immutable. So it has this immutable flag on it that cannot be changed. So what it's going to do is it's going to deny any deletion of those particular backups. So if you have that kind of that bodyguard on your Linux box to kind of keep those particular maybe admins or ransomware or anything out from getting deleted. And then how do we do that is actually with an immutable flag. This immutable flag is set, and then once it's set, you can't override it. There's and this is basically saying, hey, this is how long I want it particularly set for. And here on our next slide, I'll actually show you how easy it is to set an immutable flag. If you look here to the bottom right-hand side, in that little green box there, it says make the recent backups immutable for 30 days. Absolutely. It is literally as easy as clicking a box to have it being immutable and then setting up your particular retention. Now, you may say, well, what happens if I come into this Veeam backup replication server and try to overwrite that? Well, we don't use a root account, right? And with us not using a root account, that's not going to be able to be changed. So we use these single-use only credentials for our Hardened Linux repository. Imagine this as like a one-way bridge for writes, right? So we can always land data there. We can always do restores, but once the data has landed at the Linux repository, we're not rewriting or updating any of those particular blocks at that particular time, because that's how long it's set for. If it's set for 30 days, we'll reassess in 30 days. But always you can do restores. I think that's one of the things that people have some questions about. And then at the end of the day, what do we use to really make sure that we're using the best type of storage space saving? We use XFS. XFS is going to really leverage that block cloning and again get as much compression and dedupe as we can on that particular Linux hardened repository. So a lot of good stuff there. Again, you have a lot of different options, and it's super easy to set up a mutable repository. Now, let me talk a little bit about what's called the archive tier. So let me kind of break down this slide a little more generalistically here. So now what you're really looking at right here, yeah, it's called archive tier, but realistically this is called SOBR, scale out backup repository job. So kind of let me break this down from left to the right hand side. So performance. What is performance tier and where is that? So if you have a Veeam backup and a replication server on-prem, what we need to do is land on the performance tier first, whether that's iSCSI, Fiber Channel, NVMe, SSD. I really don't care as long as it's presented to Veeam as spinning disk that's local. So that's the performance tier. We have to land there first before we can write to any of the other tiers. Now, capacity tier. Capacity tier is object storage, whether you're landing with Amazon S3 or Microsoft Azure or even pushing up to Cloud Connect. Really doesn't matter there. Now, archive tier, though, this is for cold storage. This is for grandfather, father, son. Some guys are, or some of you are used to GFS. Some of you guys are going, what the heck is GFS? And GFS is grandfather, father, son. Basically, this is how we do weekly, yearly, and monthly. So we can take active pulls at specific times in your environment, making sure that we're pushing those to cold object storage vendors. Now, something I also want to note here, if you're landing in Amazon S3, you can't go directly over to Storage Archive for Blob, or the same thing for Azure or for AWS. So if you're going from AWS, you can't go to Glacier. So just know there is no cross compatibility there. So it's from Amazon to Amazon or from Microsoft to Microsoft. Something to note there. And really the big thing is there's a lot of cool stuff that goes into the archive tier. You really don't, and that's what you kind of see up here in the title, is write once, almost read never, because the hope is, realistically, you don't have to pull out a cold storage. Cold storage, getting pulled back out of, that's where the cost really comes into play. So let's kind of move on here just a little bit, and let's talk about the CDP, or continuous data protection. So what is this really doing? This is making sure that we have near zero recovery point objective times. And at the end of the day, this is for more of your critical workloads that need these near zero recovery point objectives. And at the end of the day, we're going to minimize a lot of this data loss because we're having such a small window from the last time we took a backup to the point in time state as it's today. And I kind of want to show you what it looks like on a high overview of like what CDP looks like. Again, this is going to be more on the technical side. And it's probably going to get into the weeds pretty fast. But let me just kind of break this down for you here on our next slide, and I'll show you what that really looks like. So at the very top, what is this guy? So this guy is called the CDP coordinator. Think of him as the top level manager. He rules everything. He's the one that communicates with vCenter, and he's the one also assigning replica tasks. Okay, so again, think of him as kind of like the hard hat or the foreman on the job. And then underneath that, we have what's called source filters. And those are on the outside. So you have two of those on both sides, right? So these source filters, these run on EXSI. And what do? They really intercept I/O requests. One filter instances is used per vdisk. That's just a little tangent there. Now, going a little further in, now we're at the daemon, right? The source daemon. Now, one of these is on if you kind of break this down, so if you drew the coordinator and drew a line right in the middle of him, these are two separate sites, so site A and site B. So the source daemon is basically used per EXSI again, and acts as the admin of the host to communicate with the CDP coordinator, the guy at the top, and the source proxy filter that's on the left a little bit. And basically what does this guy do? He really relays proxy traffic and really make sure the coordinator understands exactly what's going on. So think of him kind of as like a traffic cop in a way. And then underneath that, we got one more thing. We got the source proxy. This guy, he is the workhorse. He aggregates changes from the filter, RAM, and he adjusted RAM and the disk space as well, and he creates the replica space. This is absolutely critical for the overall understanding of what's going on here. Now, one other thing. Now we're moving on to the right-hand side. So now we have a target proxy, right? So what does this really do? This receives the blocks from the source proxy and then decompresses and de-encrypts that particular data. And then at the end, we have the target daemon, right? Because again, these are two separate sides. We have source and we have target side. And the target side basically completes and rewrites the data store and filters any active overflow of that particular data. So again, we have a lot of stuff going on here, but realistically, what does all that mean is we can get near zero RPO times with a lot of this cool technology that Veeam is built. And at this point in time, I'm going to actually pass this back over to William. He's one of our Platinum VCSP partners, and take it over from here.
It's okay. I got it, Mike. Thanks so much for everything. Absolutely great content. We are in love with the things that Veeam is doing around data protection, not only protecting you from outsider threats, but from yourself to some extent, right? And I think we're learning a little bit about all the things that you can do, not just with Veeam, but also with Veeam plus PNAP. And I think I just want to take just a minute to talk about how easy it is to get started if you're already a Veeam customer. If you're already a Veeam customer, we are talking about quick sign up process, creation of an account on our side, and literally putting in a username and password and URL into your service provider or into the service provider configuration inside of Veeam Backup and Recovery, and you can start replicating your backups right now. The full featured DR solution, it's almost that easy as well, right? Literally, you just work with us to see how many resources you need in a DR event. You get your account, you set up your failover plan, you start replicating your data, and boom, it's there for you right when you need it. And it includes these things, right? You get, if you use our object storage platform, you get insider protection, or sorry, if you get immutability. If you're leveraging our production environment for hosting, you get insider protection as part of that. So there's just so many things that you get as part of working with PNAP together. Pay for what you use, fanatical support, super fast recoveries, and the ability, at least it's not included, but the ability to replicate this across 6 different regions worldwide. So we can handle your business operations in Europe, we can handle your business operations in Asia, and we can handle your business operations in the United States. And we make Veeam a central part of everything we do as an organization, right? In our data security cloud environment, which is a high security, high compliance community cloud built for SMBs and mid-market companies, we leverage Veeam, soup to nuts to do all of our data protection, needs, help our customers with replication, everything. We do disaster recovery and offsite backups like we talked about, and increasingly more and more and more SaaS data protection. So we launched the backup for Office 365. We added Teams recently to that service, and we can't wait for Salesforce to be available so that we can help customers, turnkey backup all those SaaS platforms in their environment. So this is a little snapshot of what we look like today as an organization. So many more regions coming. It's funny. I started with this organization 17 years ago, and now to see kind of where everything sits today, it's pretty impressive. But yeah, helping businesses all around the globe. I'm going to launch a poll for our marketing friends so that they understand if anybody wants to talk about these solutions more. I know we focus on education today. I hate to beat people to death with salesy content. So if you want to talk to us about backup and disaster recovery, how easy it is, how cost effective it can be, we try to make it super simple. If you don't want to chat with us right now, just indicate so, and we will we'll not call you. So, I think that ultimately, I hope everyone had a great time. If you have questions, please post them. I'm going to take care of those next. So we'll be able to get through those quickly. We've already had a few people submit some. So we'll try to address them as quickly as possible. I want to thank everyone for taking the time to press the poll button. I know that, responding to polls is not something that everybody wants to do. If you're not ready to talk about it right now, click B or C, and we're not going to hound you. But yeah. All right, I'm going to go ahead and close down the polling. Again, thanks to everyone that clicked the vote button. And let's close that up. And all righty, thank you so much for everybody, and we're gonna jump right into questions. All right, we'll take a few more while everybody continues to get theirs in. All right, I'll take the first one. Somebody asked, how can I test all this stuff? Like, is it free for me to test not only the service, but also when you're doing things like DR testing, is that free? I'll try to answer both those questions in case I wasn't really clear what they were asking. But yes, we do offer the ability to do 30-day free trials. You can set it all up. It takes no time at all. So usually most people can accomplish at least a basic POC of offsite backup in hours. The disaster recovery side can be a little bit more laborious because you're having to replicate an entire application. Maybe that's 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 VMs. Takes a little while to get that accomplished, but we do offer POCs around that as well. And then when you're using our DR services, specifically the live replication, we do offer the ability to test that once a year for 7 days, no charges. So there's no meter ticking the moment you decide to test your stuff. We want you to test your disaster recovery plan. It's important. It's important in general. It's important to us as your provider. So we try to make that easy. All right, let's see what else we got here. Hey, Mike, does Veeam charge anything extra for object lock and immutability?
Ooh, that's a good question. And that answer is no.
Perfect. I like that. So if you got standard, you get those capabilities.
Absolutely.
All right. I do know for those of you that I know this is going to be changed eventually, but right now you still need SOBRs. You still need scale out backup repositories to use object storage targets and external repositories. So you have to be using, I think, Enterprise. Is that correct, Mike?
So looking at the thing, I'm pretty sure standard still comes with SOBR. I'm almost certain.
Okay, cool. All right, that's good, because I mean, certainly you need it for capacity tier and archive tier.
Absolutely.
We had a question. This is backups to the cloud, restoration from the cloud. Can you talk a little bit about air gapping in the DR scenario? I guess I'll mention around what options we have, or for at least phoenixNAP specifically. We have the ability to do privatized 100% dedicated disaster recovery targets. So we can actually replicate what you are doing on-prem in a 100% dedicated environment. And that level of dedication can actually even be kind of scaled. We launched a service about 1.5 years ago called Bare Metal Cloud. It has the ability to spin up instances on demand, including ESXi instances. We launched a service with the team at Backblaze that also leverages Veeam, where customers of B2 can put their offsite backups in Backblaze, and then in the event that they need to do a restoration, we built automation so that customers can spin up dedicated instances inside of a secure logical tenant that is not shared with anybody else. And those instances can be connected to B2. All of the outbound egress is free. and you can restore to an ESXi host or a cluster of ESXi hosts, pretty quickly. I mean, we're doing some more enhancements to that solution right now. Hopefully, we'll debut that at Veeam coming up in May, and we've got it to the point where it's automated enough where you can actually start restoring virtual machines into a running ESXi environment in about 3 minutes, 5 minutes, somewhere in that area. And maybe it takes about 5 or 6 minutes per 100 gigs to come back to life. So I think we're getting to the point where certainly, that's still haphazard. It's not as eloquent as a disaster recovery replication scheme with a plan and a failover plan, but it does give you the ability to still recover. And in this case, actually recover to dedicated infrastructure. And if you really needed something even crazier, you get into positions where you can do everything privately. Now, for protecting yourself against a ransomware infection of your disaster recovery environment, the best way to do that is through restore points, right? So you not only have the ability to recover in a kind of real-time failover capability, but you have the ability to recover to a different point in time, right? And I think that is what most people would do from a ransomware perspective, always on type of perspective. There's also ways to harden some of those repositories that you're moving data into. And then ultimately, again, you shouldn't just be using disaster recovery as a security tool. You should be using a backup capability as well. So I think that's all the comments I will make on that one. What else do we got here? Let's see. Oh, Mike, on the immutability side, if we specify it, can it be changed, or can anybody change it before that time clock runs out?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think that's a question that I get quite a bit, just because let's just pretend you have it set for 30 days. An admin gets in there and they think they can just change it to 1 day and delete the backups. Well, that's absolutely not the case. It's locked for that particular amount of time, just in case somebody actually does get access. So no, it's not able to be changed. Once it's locked, and then you do have a time to change it, but that's after the retention period is up.
Exactly. I think the only thing I've seen on that is you would need to do serious destruction of the environment at that point, right? You could technically blow away your whole repository, but you're not going to get access to that data. So it's a bit complex of an answer, but I think that's the right one. And same thing applies to object lock in S3, whether it's our S3 implementation or Amazon's. There's just no way to delete that data once the policies have been implemented. Even us as like a root user in the operating system of the file system of the storage cannot do that. And that's what makes it worm compliant in a lot of cases, and compliant with other federal compliance standards. All right, I think that's all the things we had for today. I really, truly want to thank everybody for coming out. I know it's taking time out of your day. If there are any questions, fire them over. We'll get them answered. And I hope everyone has a great, great weekend. And I'm sorry if this makes you angry, but go Heels. Talk to you later.
Thanks, guys.